Come along, Mika, we have to go. The van will be here in a minute. Juanita yelled from the front room. Nick, or Mika as he was called now, checked once more his appearance. He was quite convincing after 2 weeks of intense training in his new duties as a cleaning woman. The dove gray polycotton dress, the dark pantyhose and the sensible canvas white shoes completed the image of a working domestic. He carried a canvas bag containing some personal belongings, like a small purse with his new company card identified him as Mika Bologna, a female domestic worker of Hispanic origin. The bag contained as well his full white working apron plus a dark gray cardigan in case he was feeling a bit cool inside the van. Another look in the bathroom's full mirror. Nick saw the reflection of a rather plain-looking darkish woman looking back at him. He kept his new dark hair in a tight ponytail. He was certain nobody could detect his hair extensions done so cleverly by his wife's special beautician. He had a bit of makeup on, nothing fancy, just enough to smooth and darken his complexion, plus some clear lipstick to emphasize the fullness of his lips. Yes, he looked the part, and that excited him instantly. He was about to fulfill a long-standing dream, though the way everything happened was not at all as he was planning it. He left the bathroom and found Juanita already in the front door of their modest apartment, gesturing at him. "Come, girl, the van is already here, I can hear the engine going." She started walking fast down the stairs. They were living in the 4th floor of an old apartment complex with no lifts, of course. They could not afford anything better on their moderate wages. She turned to Nick and said, "Now Mika, try and keep a low profile today. Don't speak to anyone unless spoken. Follow my directions when we will be in our first cleaning job. You are my assistant for the day. And keep your voice low and never speak loudly. Don't worry, you look average, you can pass easily, and also don't forget your heavy Spanish accent when you speak in your uneducated English. You are not the high-powered WASP lawyer anymore. You are a female Latino domestic worker being in this country only a few months. Is that clear?" Nick said a yes. Juanita, it is clear, as he heard all that with mixed feelings. She just reminded him the world he just gave up for a whole year in exchange of the new world he was coming in, the world of low-income menial workers. At that moment he realized that probably he did a terrible mistake by accepting the terms of his powerful wife Cynthia to become a lowly domestic worker. Would the reality be as exciting as his lasting fantasy? They entered the van, where another 4 women identically dressed were already sitting comfortably. Everybody said a hearty buenos dias, and the male driver started the van. Nick looked at his cheap small wristwatch. It was 5 in the morning and they were on their way to their first job, having clean an office block. He would be working for the next 12 hours until 5 p.m. with an hour off for lunch break. Soon most of the women, including Juanita, started to doze. He closed his eyes, but his mind was running fast. Soon he started thinking all the unusual and exciting things that happened the last few weeks and changed his life so dramatically. He always was a cross-dresser. He told his wife Cynthia from the early days when they started dating that he liked wearing female clothes. Cynthia was not annoyed or worried. On the contrary, she found it sweet and slightly amusing and never discouraged Nick. She never encouraged him, though, to go all the way and start appearing as a tranny in public. They kept Nick's particularity, or eccentricity as she liked calling his CD activities, strictly within the house boundaries. Nick started wearing panties on a daily basis, some more some less frilly, and also he started going to bed wearing a nightie, very often matching the one Cynthia was wearing. When they moved in together, she noticed a great aptitude and willingness in Nick to be involved with the housework and cooking. Gradually he became the unofficial housekeeper. And then the aprons appeared. Nick started wearing them more and more around the house, some unisex working aprons but some clearly more feminine and frilly. Cynthia reacted positively once more. In fact, she was sort of encouraging him to wear his pinnies. "You need an apron, darling, to protect your clothes when you do your messy cleaning jobs or cooking," she used to say to him. Little did she know that all those remarks excited Nick tremendously and made him more willing to plunge deeper into some sort of submissive femininity, as he used to call his tendency. At about this stage in their life, their careers took off in different fields. Cynthia was absorbed in the family advertising company, and soon she became the company's creative director. In fact, she was a very talented graphic designer, and her work started to win international awards. She had to travel a lot for her work, often abroad, leaving Nick behind. Nick pursued his career as a lawyer, and soon he became a junior partner in one of the best-known firms in town. He organized his job in such a way that he could spend quite a bit of time at home preparing his various cases. He did that on purpose, because he was able to spend more time in a dress or skirt and blouse outfit in particular when Cynthia was out of town. In fact, he started to dress up completely with a wig and makeup on when Cynthia was away. He downloaded various books on the subject of transformation, and in a period of several years he became quite good in transforming himself to a convincing woman, or so he thought, because nobody else ever set eyes to his female persona, including Cynthia, who only knew Nick in a dress and apron. Somehow he felt that she would object to anything more drastic in his appearance, and he kept the dress-up sessions to himself. And then he discovered the maid's uniforms. He always had a secret passion for them, but it took him years to order a couple of them through internet. He somehow felt ashamed to wear them. But the urge was far too strong, and finally he secretly became the maid of the house. Whenever Cynthia was away, he was always in a uniform when he was doing his chores. Nothing fancy, just a housekeeping light blue, gray or pink dress and a full white apron, sensible shoes, light makeup and a short pageboy wig. Of course, by that stage he was the proud owner of a pair of very expensive breast forms which gave to his body the feminine shape he was so strongly longing for. He started spending longer hours in the house. He wanted more and more to be in a dress or his maid's uniform. But at the same time he started not to pay the attention he should in his work, and his career took a turn for the worst. His supervisor, an older and experienced female lawyer, had given him 2 written warnings asking him to improve his work performance because the senior partners of the firm were not pleased with him and he was in peril of losing his job. Nick never mentioned the work problems to Cynthia and made a sincere effort to improve his performance, but his tendency to be more and more in the preferred role of a housekeeper and maid killed all his initiatives at work, so it came as no surprise to him the letter that fired him. All of a sudden in his early 30s Nick was out of his professional world and with no good references to get another job. The senior partners were clearly angry with him and his poor performance. They gave him a great chance for a brilliant career and he kicked it. Finally he had to tell Cynthia, who acted very supportively to him. He never mentioned, of course, that he lost his job because of poor performance. He simply said that the firm had to fire several younger lawyers because they were cutting down costs for financial reasons. He promised that he should start looking for a new job, but the prospects were not good at the moment. Cynthia reassured him that there would be no financial problems in their household. Her income within the 6 digits by now was sufficient to support them very comfortably. Then she took him completely by surprise by telling him that a trust from her very rich grandmother would be activated when she was going to turn 30 next month. The trust included a property situated in a very exclusive suburb where they could move in a couple of months, plus other assets and investments that would allow them to live comfortably for the rest of their life. In fact, she added that it was convenient that Nick would have all that free time because he would be able to start packing and preparing for their moving. Nick couldn't believe his luck. He would be able now to spend most of his time in a dress or his uniform. He had plenty to do now, plus of course his day-to-day running of the house. Cynthia totally accepted his new role as her homemaker, as she started calling him. In 2 months they moved to the new mansion, which has been wonderfully redecorated. To Nick's utter astonishment, a live-in maid welcomed them in the house. When Nick asked Cynthia, she conceded that she knew about it and kept it as a surprise for Nick. She explained that it was part of the trust conditions. Her grandmother thought that Cynthia and Nick, two young and career-minded professionals, wouldn't have the time or energy to be involved with the day-to-day running of a big mansion. Nick couldn't hide his disappointment. The existence of the live-in maid would deprive him of all his favorite activities, the dressing up, the housework, the shopping, and all sorts of other day-to-day things he got used to do in their previous house. He would have to act as the master of the household, a role he wasn't at all happy to play. Cynthia, with her shrewd mind, instantly picked it, and in the privacy of their new bedroom she explained to Nick how she organized their new life. Because, as Nick would find soon, Cynthia had organized everything very carefully. It was in her genes to be the driving force in all her activities. She was born a leader. Nick, as he was sitting in the van, his dove gray uniform dress modestly covering his knees, surrounded by his fellow cleaners in his first day of work, could still remember Cynthia's exact words that particular day several months ago. "I know how you feel, Nick. I know that you got used during the last few months to a certain way of life and that you have no intentions of going back to work in the near future, so I already explained certain things to Imelda. But before I go any further, let me tell you a few things about our maid." And Cynthia explained that Imelda, who was in her late 30s, worked for years in her grandmother's household as one of the many servants in that house. She was a Hispanic woman and her English was still rather moderate and much accented. But she was a great housekeeper and an excellent cook. Nick's heart sank again. He wouldn't have any role in the house. But Cynthia continued, "Before you start crying, darling, because I can tell from your sad face that you are about to do that, let me tell you that I already had a lengthy talk with Imelda and explained to her a few things about you. I told her that you are in between works now and you will be spending most of your time at home, that you try to establish yourself as a legal articles writer and that you enjoy a lot to cook and you don't mind at all housework. So she knows already where you stand." Nick couldn't help thinking about his dressing up habits, and Cynthia understood that as well because she added, "I also told Imelda that you enjoy wearing your aprons when you are cooking or do any messy jobs, so you can still be my homemaker. You can work together with Imelda, you can decide the menus, you can still do the shopping. In other words, you will be a house husband and Imelda has to work with you in all matters concerning the house, and I'll be the breadwinner of the family." He finally managed to ask Cynthia about his moderate dressing up habits, and she simply said, "I am afraid, darling, you will have to be in a dress or one of your favorite skirt and blouse outfits when Imelda has her days off. That will be Sunday and Wednesday afternoon. I think she will probably freak out if she sees you in a dress. She is a very religious woman, a practicing Catholic." Of course Nick wasn't happy about that. And of course he couldn't tell to Cynthia the whole truth, that lately, for instance, he was dressing up completely with makeup and a wig on and his breast forms in place, often in one of his maid's uniforms. That had to stay as his secret for the time being. And he still strongly remembers her final words that sounded like a warning to him, said of course in her cautious and polite manner. "I am certain, Nick, you will get along with Imelda. She is a capable lady, and she will be able to teach you a few things if you are willing to learn. You might think that you are a competent homemaker, but you still have a lot to learn." He liked what he heard. She was more or less encouraging him to interact with Imelda, but then she added, "But of course you must keep a certain distance from her. You are after all her employer, so to speak, so don't fraternize with the help, please, Nick. Just enhance your role as her boss and employer. She has to remember her place." "Can I trust you on that?" Nick reluctantly had to agree to that. After all, Cynthia was holding all the cards now, and he had to go along with her suggestions. Of course, everything went the opposite way. Imelda proved to be quite a bossy lady, and within days she assessed him completely. She encouraged him to do more housework, always wearing one of his many aprons. She was working across him in one of her morning uniforms, very similar to the ones he was hiding in his closet. He knew they were bought in the same shop, called Domestic Solutions. Very soon Nick and Imelda dropped all formalities and she started calling him Nick or even Nicky sometimes. Finally, one morning that they were doing some serious spring cleaning with lots of dust, Imelda said to him quite innocently, "You know, Nicky, you should wear a uniform like me. After all, we are doing the same jobs in this house and I feel that you are my fellow maid by now." Her words came like an electric shock and excited him tremendously. He couldn't control himself anymore, he had to tell her, so he said as innocently as possible, "You know, Imelda, I have a couple of uniforms like yours stuck somewhere among my things. I bought them some time ago, before we moved in this house, and I used them doing my chores in our previous, much smaller home." She was intrigued when she heard that, but she didn't quite believe him because she said, "You pull my leg, Nicky, I can't believe that you have a maid's uniform." That was a challenge that he took eagerly. "Just wait here, Imelda, I am going to bring an exact copy, including the matching apron, of the one you wear now. In that case, Nicky, please put your uniform on and join me properly dressed, so we can continue working as two fellow maids," she added in a mischievous manner. At that moment he knew that he was about to break his promise to Cynthia not to fraternize with the help, but he couldn't stop himself. The urge was too strong and Imelda's encouragement was all he needed. That was it. The spell was broken, they became two fellow maids in the house. Imelda accepted him to the point that very soon she started referring to Cynthia as their employer, as he was part of the domestic staff himself. And of course one day the inevitable happened. Cynthia came back unexpectedly because her trip abroad was cancelled. She used to warn Nick if she was coming back to the house before or even after her usual time, but this time she didn't, and as he found out later, she had her reasons. She wanted to check on Imelda and him. Her intuition was guiding her on that, plus the signals they both were sending to her. She could tell that Imelda became Nick's pal. He wasn't her boss anymore. They both were in their matching uniforms in the downstairs living area vacuuming happily when she suddenly appeared in front of them. The vacuum cleaner's noise killed the noise of her car. The expression in her face was a mixture of amusement and contempt as they both looked at her in a worried manner. She only said a few words. "Imelda, you can continue your vacuuming. As for you, Nick, I want to see you now in my office upstairs." Then she turned and started going up the stairs where she kept a small studio next to the master bedroom where she could work during weekends if something urgent was coming up. He followed her, starting to untie his apron. She saw him with the corner of her eye, saying in an annoyed manner, "Don't bother to change, Nick. You seem to be the maid in this house for some time now. Don't pretend that you are something else." Her words were quite sharp, but they gave him a singular pleasure as he tied his apron back. His feelings were mixed as he followed her in her studio. She sat behind her desk as Nick stood awkwardly in front of her, feeling very uncomfortable. For the first time he faced his wife dressed completely as a maid. "I'll be very short, Nick," Cynthia started with a smirk in her face. "You betrayed my trust and you repeatedly were lying to me." Nick tried to say something, but she raised her hand firmly, telling him, "Please, let me finish. It won't take long, and whatever you tell me can't change my mind." She sounded very ominous and Nick got seriously worried for the first time. Cynthia continued, "You have two options, Nick. Either you go instantly from this house and start a new life, or you get a punishment to fit the crime." He was aghast. Would Cynthia be that cruel to throw him out of the house? He couldn't even think about that option. He simply couldn't imagine himself without her, so he eagerly said, "I'll go for the second option, please, whatever that is. I can't even think of myself without you, Cynthia." The second option, of course, was the creation of Mika, a female domestic cleaner who was sitting in a van going to work for the first time. Everything happened in 2 weeks. Cynthia was a great organizer, and within days all were in place. Nick's new identity as Mika Bologna. Mika's new modest apartment to share with her fellow domestic worker Juanita, the only one who knew Nick's real identity. Nick's transformation to a clinic specializing in male to female transformation, and finally the intensive lessons in housekeeping and cleaning. Nick was obliged to sign a 1-year contract with a renewal option of another year as Mika Bologna, a female domestic worker of Latino background. All of a sudden his reverie was interrupted by an abrupt stop of the van and then the booming voice of the driver. "Okay girls, we arrived in our first job of the day, aprons on please and follow me to the basement where all the cleaning equipment is stored. Hurry up please, we haven't got all day." Nick felt Juanita's elbow kicking him. "Come Mika, we have to hurry now, our long working day is about to start."